Good morning, a very warm welcome to this session on making research work in practice for regenerative agriculture. I have to say I feel a little bit like the opening act at Glastonbury. We're starting the festival off, as it were, but let's hope it all goes well. My name is Richard Pywell. I work for the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and I'll be attempting to chair the session. So I'll do my very best to stick to time. And so I'd just like to give you a little bit of background on the session and what we're going to be talking about. So one of the biggest challenges we face is striking the balance between food production and tackling the biodiversity and climate crises. And in this session, we're going to highlight three major projects, H3, Fix Our Food, and AgZero Plus, which are all working with innovative regenerative farmers to tackle the issue at scale and in a practical way. So you'll be hearing from farmers and research scientists today. All three projects are collecting empirical data to support the pathways to net zero plus, and we're working with farmers to collect all of this data. And before I hand over to our first speaker, I would like to say thank you to Tracy Duncombe. It's over there. Tracy's a KE, a Knowledge Exchange Fellow in Transforming the Food Systems project. And Tracy has done an amazing job of convening us today, herding cats, as it were. So thank you, Tracy, for getting us organised. So, yeah, and finally, just before I hand over to the first speaker, just a few words on the structure. We've got 5 panelists today. And so what we're going to do is each panelist will speak. And at the end, we're going to have an open panel session with mics circulated. So please, can you hold your questions until the end of the presentations and talks, and we will endeavour to get to all of you by the end. So yeah, I'd like to therefore, I have great pleasure in introducing our first speaker, Dr. Ruth Wade from the University of Leeds.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming. So yeah, my name's Ruth Wade. I'm at the University of Leeds, and I work on a project called Fix Our Food with Pippa Chapman and Lisa Collins. And we've been looking at measuring the impacts of regenerative agriculture, particularly in Yorkshire region. And we cover 4 activities. So really trying to understand the current system. We want to support as much as we can, provide evidence-based practice, and obviously, importantly, sharing all of the information back. So when I first started this project, I really wanted the university to support in whatever way we could the local farmers in our area. So I first actually had a survey out. We had 140 farmers respond to this survey. And I first wanted to know what the main aim of regenerative agriculture was and what they felt was the main aim. And I'm sure it's no surprise to the audience here that it was all about improving soil quality and restoring degraded soils. And I also asked what were the main challenges. And again, I'm sure no surprise to the audience here, but it was lack of information on good practice and lack of evidence. Now, this is something that I think as the University of Leeds, we should be supporting where we can. So then I went out to many different farms in the local area to try to understand what practices people were doing, what were the challenges, what were the motivations behind doing it. And what I found was that actually everyone was doing something completely different. There was lots of different end goals, lots of different ways of reaching that end goal, and everyone's starting point was different. And that's not even to mention that everyone was on a different soil type, climate, field and farm history, farm context, the timing, the rotation, the equipment available. So as a university doing trials that are measuring the impact of these practices, how do we develop a trial that measures anything with all of these different variables involved? But what I did find, obviously, and everyone knows here, that most of the farmers were using the 6 principles that we talk about so avidly now. And so we have a University of Leeds farm. So I thought, right, let's put a trial in at the farm, looking at these principles and stacking them to see what the impact the stacking of those principles had. So here's the trial last year. So its aim is to demonstrate and measure the impacts of different transition strategies to regen ag. So it was under conventional management before we took it on. And then I have 7 treatments that are replicated 3 times in a randomized block design across the field. And the first one is conventional. It follows none of those principles that we know so dearly about. And then the next one follows 2 principles, which is minimize soil disturbance and keep the soil covered. The next one follows 3 principles, so we add in diversity. The next one follows 4 principles, so we add integrate livestock. And then the final one follows all those 5 principles by maintaining a living root all year round. And then we have 2 other treatments that completely change the rotation. So they're in herbal lays at the moment, and we'll put them back into the cereal rotation in the next few years, so we can measure the impact of that on the soil. And the measurements that we're taking, we're trying to measure as much as we can. And because of the trial being at the university farm, we can really install all the high-tech latest equipment, but we also can do really, really detailed analysis on the soil, crop, greenhouse gas emissions, hydrological properties, yield, profit of each system as well, so we know exactly what's been done on every plot. And we also have a Met Office station in the corner of the field, so we know what's happening to the rainfall, temperature, etc. So this trial is completely unique. It's been co-designed with local farmers. I forgot to mention that every year we bring farmers, anyone who wants to come, to have a look at the trial, and we say, if you had this system, what would you do? And so every intervention that we do is based on what the stakeholders and farmers that come to the trial are doing on their own farm and have advised us to do. So as much as possible, it's trying to replicate what farmers are doing on their own farms. And we use as much commercial equipment as possible because the plots are 12 metres by 40, so it's not a small plot trial. And it compares multiple pathways to transition. It's obviously, as I said, a large replicated plot trial, and we've got the measurement of high-frequency greenhouse gas emissions. And so just to quickly show you some of the data that we're getting from this trial. So it's only 1.5 years in at the moment, but we're also already seeing changes in soil organic carbon distribution. So this graph shows changes from 2022 to 2023. Anything that's above the line has an increase. Anything below the line is a decrease. And we've got 2 different depths. So the green is 20 to 30 and the grey is 0 to 10 centimetres depth in the soil. And what you can see is those 2 systems that we've ploughed, we've basically taken the soil organic carbon from the top and put it deeper down. So we just changed the profile basically. Whereas those systems that have increasing regen ag principles that are in the middle, we're either seeing no change or an increase in soil organic carbon from adding farmyard manure and not inverting the soil. So just to really quickly summarise, the trial is providing evidence-based practice. We are, most importantly, I am learning from farmers who come down to the trial and tell us what they would do with their system. And that's led to incredible conversations where we're all learning from one another. It's a demonstration site there for sharing ideas. And we've created a community, a network, and what I hope of trusted peer-to-peer and farmer scientist learning. It's furthering our understanding of regenerative agriculture systems, and there's a lot more that we could do with this trial, so that's really exciting. And the evidence that's coming from it and the data can be used, for models and feed into the DEFRA new payment systems. But there are challenges. It is only on one field, on one farm. I completely recognise that. And things take a long time to occur, so it needs to be funded for a long time so we can measure the impact. So those questions are, how do we scale it up? And how do we cover all the options as well? I've got 7 treatments, but I know lots of people are doing lots more than what we're managing to achieve. But it's a step in the right direction. It's measuring the impacts of stacked regen principles in the same field next to one another, so we can really measure the impacts on soil, crop, greenhouse gas emissions, and profit. So thank you very much. Got lots of people to acknowledge because it's a large trial, and please feel free to follow me on Twitter.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. If we now hand over to Fraser, who's going to give us a farmer perspective on these trials. Thank you.
I'm Fraser Hugill. I'm a farmer. but I'm also an environmental advisor as part of the FWAG Association up in Yorkshire. And what I'm going to talk about a little bit more is the trial that we're doing. But as I've said, I'm a farmer and an advisor, and a lot of what I do is getting out and working with farmers around the North York Moors and the Wardian Hills National Landscape. I run a couple of farmer cluster groups, as well as this project called doing the knowledge transfer for a project called Revitalise. And this sort of project came about by us as farmers having curious minds. And we've had a number of sort of grassland experts come to talk to us about, how do we grow more grass? How do we work with grassland in a regenerative system? And it kept coming up, this issue of cocksfoot. And so it just sort of stimulated, like I say, I like that sort of curious minds in terms of, well, these guys are telling us about this. Let's try it out. And I think one of the things that sort of phrases that we've come up with, what we really want to do as we move sort of into a more regenerative system is sort of move away from people selling us products, but be very sort of aware that our people stopping selling us products, but they're selling us dreams. Will this stuff actually work? So, the idea was, as it says on the screen there, we all went to the pub. It's amazing what happens in a pub. And we invited Pippa and Ruth along from Leeds Uni, and we invited somebody from a seed company, and we invited the Protected Landscapes team, and we talked quite a lot. And it's amazing, actually, when we get in a pub, we can talk quite a lot about grass. I think they're all quite amazed that farmers can talk for 3 hours about grass in a pub. But it's a good environment to do things. I would recommend it. So we came up with the project. The question, and we've always got to come up with a question, is can we use cocksfoot as a replacement for ryegrass? Is it an alternative? Have we all had ryegrass pushed at us? But actually, we've got these experts saying cocksfoot might be an alternative. It's deep rooting. It doesn't like fertilizer as much, and the 10 farmers were all in sort of challenging conditions as well. I think you're onto a good project when you can find 10 other farmers, I'm one, and there's another 9 of us, in a really small geographic area. When we were doing funding bids, it was like, well, you know what, I'm not sure about your question. Well, I've got 9 other farmers that are within probably about 7 miles of me. So there's got to be, there's definitely a question there. And I think that was really important. So we brought different experts together, Leeds, and we're working with a guy called Jonathan Holmes, who's been absolutely fantastic in terms of providing that sort of expert and coming up with some mixes. And really importantly, we've been supported by innovative farmers who have come on board and farming in protected landscapes, and that's been really important. But really, in the last couple of slides is just really our observations and lessons, because that's what this all about. What are we learning? We're only a year into the project. But I think the real key thing that I think we're getting out of it is we own it. We as the farmers own this project. This isn't an academic or a seed company or anybody else with a vested interest, perhaps, saying, do you want to learn about this farmer? And then we'll go and do it. This is about us learning. And already we're getting different results to what we thought, but we haven't really got a fear of it going wrong. If cocksfoot doesn't work, I don't really care. It means that as an advisor, I haven't been pushing something for 10 years before the farmers are all telling me it's going wrong. We're learning ourselves. So that's really important. Really importantly is what we're learning is within our cultural constraints. It's within the context of our 10 farmers. It's not something happening somewhere else. It's something that we, as farmers around us, can all go and look at. We can see what's happening. We can see what isn't. Perhaps it's not always the most scientifically robust, but we can look at it, we can feel it, we can pull it up and do what we want with it, and it's within our own landscape, and we can relate to it. Timescales is really challenging because some of this stuff we almost wanted to know about it last year, and also academics do work at different timescales to farmers. We've certainly learned that. Ruth knew I was going to say that, so she isn't sort of prodding me at this point. But it is something we do find quite challenging. Usually I want something doing next week, and Leeds takes about 3 months, doesn't it, to make it happen? So beware of that, but that's great. We're learning that. But the key lessons, I think what we've got so far about it is that flexibility of funding and really that trusted support. And I've got to say, farming in protected landscapes and innovative farmers have been absolutely fantastic in terms of that flexibility, but also they haven't got that fear of failure. There isn't like, well, if your cocksfoot doesn't grow, this trial is, I want the money back. And that's quite important to me because I'm the person that's cash flowing it and making it happen. So we've taken ownership, but we've also taken financial responsibility for it as well. So I need a funder that I know is going to support me. But that funding has really helped mitigate the risk for the farmers. They've still taken a risk, because if it is, we have had issues on some of the sites, and they have taken a risk, but that bit of support just takes away that risk a little bit. And I think that is really important, that we share risk between academics, government, and farmers. But it's giving us access to knowledge as farmers. Access to knowledge is everything going forward, and that's our knowledge. But the final thing is the power of sharing. The biggest thing I've got out of it is the WhatsApp group. And last night it was pinging around because people are starting cutting some of them, and we're getting tissue test results back, and we're just bouncing out things back and forwards. And I think that's the great thing. It's that farmer network. And my final lesson that's on there is be careful tonight if you go down the bar, because you're never sure what you might agree to. So that'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Fraser. Okay, I'd like to hand you over to Katherine Berthon, who's going to talk about Transforming the Food System project.
This is the H3 project.
H3
project. Don't bring a slide, they said, to Groundswell, and I have one, but we'll see how that goes. Do I have to do anything for it? Is that? Yeah, okay. So we in the H3 project are collaborating with farmers to do a co-designed experiment testing transitioning to regenerative agriculture on real farms in the UK in 2 different landscapes. We've got farmers in the east and farmers in the southwest, and we're working with farmer clusters. And we're testing the implementation of the practices you see listed there, which aren't a random set of practices. These are practices that we asked farmers to tell us that they were already implementing or would be interested in implementing in terms of regen ag in these landscapes. There was a large agreement between the 2 different landscapes, so they're not a complete list of all the practices that everyone is doing, as Ruth was saying before. And so central to our co-designed experiment is that we have groups of farmers in each landscape that are transitioning or have agreed during the study to implement more of these practices that you see listed on the slide, things like reducing tillage, direct drilling, herbal lays, or cover crops. That should say organic inputs rather than just going organic, because as we know, there's that distinction and tension there. So we have farmers that are transitioning, and we're measuring before they've transitioned and started implementing these practices, which happened in 2022. And in 2023, the farmers started implementing new practices, and we're starting now to measure what's happening after that. Because regen ag is something that takes a little while to get into it, and you might not see changes, particularly in the soil immediately after you've started this, we have 2 other groups that we've put into this project. In terms of the design of the experiment, we have farmers that are in the same landscapes that have been doing these practices for a longer time period, so for at least 3 years prior to the project, or have sections of their farm. So these treatments are occurring either on separate farms or in different habitat. I was going to say habitat. I'm an ecologist. In different places, in different sites on these farms. And I should say that these sites are 60 hectares and involve multiple fields, so that we can take into account crop rotation. So this is a large-scale implementation of regen ag. We also have control farmers that have agreed during the project to limit their use of regen practices. I forgot that I had the clicker. And we're measuring the impact of implementing these practices on a range of different things. We've tried to measure as many different things as possible. We're taking this complexity that Ruth was talking about and doing what a good ecologist always does, and just measure everything and see what happens. And we'd be interested to hear if there was anything we've forgotten to measure, or within limits, obviously. So we're looking at the inputs and in terms of fertilizer use and herbicide and fuel use on farms that are regen and not regen. We're looking at yield and crop nutrition. And we're also having interviews with farmers to look at the social and cultural dimensions of regen and sort of regenerating mindsets. We're also looking at biodiversity and, of course, soil health, looking at earthworms and water-stable aggregates as indicators of soil health. And in terms of biodiversity, we're looking at everything from the creepy crawlies like natural enemies, beetles, spiders, aphid pests, birds, and pollinators. And as everyone in this room already knows, and as Ruth stated before, the first thing we encountered is everyone's doing it slightly differently. So this is a fancy graph that shows each farm is a different column, and you can see that the degree to which the practice is implemented is darker. The darker the green, the more it's implemented over the last 5 years. So no one is doing all of the 5 practices all the time. There's variation between fields, so a regen farmer might do something different on one field compared to the other, depending on the crop that's being put in. But
So we need to be able to deal with this complexity in some way. And how we're tackling it in the H3 is we're going to be developing a regenerative practice scoring system to try and take into account the combinations of practices and how they've been implemented to see sort of the degree to which you are regenerative. No one's going to be 100% regenerative all the time, but you can see along your journey of regenerative agriculture, and as you're implementing more practices or implementing them more consistently, developing a measure that allows you to track how you're following that process. And then lastly, just a tiny teaser of what I've got a flyer that's hanging around at the moment that has some more farmer quotes and some other things in terms of the results, and a link where you can get more information. But a couple of things that we've found is that there's less fertilizer use and insecticide, but there's no difference in the herbicide use on regen farms compared to conventional farms so far. And we're seeing that our soil health indicators are obviously improving. And that's it.
Thank you, Katherine. Right, so we'll hand over to Tom Pearson, who's going to give us a farmer perspective on the H3 project. Thank you, Tom.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, so my name's Tom Pearson. I farm in Cambridgeshire, so not too far from here. And I am the chairman or lead farmer of our farm cluster group, which for anonymity reasons, I'm probably not allowed to say who we are. I don't know, but anyway, we're in Cambridgeshire. So we got involved in this through the farm cluster, and not that research has to be linked to farm clusters, but just to say it's actually a really nice fit. From a researcher point of view, a farm cluster, is a group of farmers who know and trust each other and have communication channels already in place. So it just works very nicely. It's very easy for us to sort of rally the troops, as it were, for the researchers. And so Elizabeth Ranler, FWAG East, is our facilitator, and so she got wind of this project through Lynn Dix, I think, Professor Lynn Dix at Department of Zoology in Cambridge, University of Cambridge, and then brought that to the table for our steering group. And so we heard about it, but right from the beginning, we were allowed to have input on that. And so Elizabeth and I join these sort of meetings every Tuesday for an hour, every other Tuesday for an hour. And it was not to put the researchers down at all, but it was blatantly obvious, right? They had a wonderful idea about what they wanted to do, and it was completely impractical. And only because, it would be lovely if we could have offered what they wanted, because that would have made the stats a lot easier. But they ultimately, they would have loved 4 farmers who were properly conventional, 4 farmers who've been doing everything you could possibly do in regenerative agriculture for years and years and years, and then farmers who were completely regenerative, completely conventional, who would then be perfectly happy to change into completely regenerative overnight, right? And that's just not going to happen. But we did find the right sort of fit, and so we could work through that. And that was, I think, probably quite helpful for the researchers to have that sort of farmer-led approach. And then other things we'd sort of brought in as farmers are this sort of concept. Much as researchers would love to have funding so it could last forever and ever and ever. And of course, with these regen programs, it would be, we know it takes time to move forwards and transition. Ultimately, there is an end point. And I was quite keen to get through that idea that, well, once it's all finished, we can't necessarily as farmers have sort of great ecologists coming on farm all the time and doing all these surveys. What can we embed into this research program that will leave us with things that we can carry on doing that isn't a cost to us but is valuable to us? So managing to get some funding to pay for Vida Cycle's regen benchmarking soil mental program, for instance. And then we also built in for the farmers these sort of biannual meetings where we could go really in depth and tackle a particular aspect of regenerative agriculture. So not necessarily looking at the ins and outs of the project per se, but just going on deep dives through, cover cropping, for instance, or how to reduce your artificial inputs in a sensible way and all that sort of stuff. So I think the farmers have got quite a lot out of that. So that's been quite helpful. And I think just a note on the social science part. I think it's an absolutely fantastic addition to this H3 project. And I think all of these types of regen projects really need to try and involve social scientists as well, because ultimately this is Transforming UK Food Systems massive government grant program, and they're going to listen to this and they're going to make decisions around regenerative farming based on multiple things, but including this. And it's so important to make sure we get a farmer's story and the bottlenecks and the problems and the whole sort of the whole issue around theory of change and why it's not as simple just to click your fingers and say you all need to move to regenerative farming, right? So I think that's really important. Just as food for thought for Q&A as well, a couple of other things. It was written, I think it's written in your actual proposal that it is a farmer-led research project. And I think it's really important for researchers, if you're out there, just to understand that if you write farmer-led in there, you need to create budget lines for that, right? Okay, so that's important. And I think AgZero have been very clear and very transparent with the farmers. You know, they're not being paid, but they are getting an awful lot of great stuff. And Katherine did an awesome midterm bespoke report for each farm with their data. And farmers are all completely happy with that. That's not an issue at all. But I would say, like, if you really want to be farmer-led, then you need a point farmer to be on board all the time to be able to steer and make sure we're not going down a rabbit hole that practically is not going to happen. And then just out there, again, just stepping a bit back from H3, I think as farmers, we really should consider the idea that research can be a perfectly viable diversification on your farm business, right? And you know, sporting in the front row, all the merch he's got there. Boffin, we're part of Boffin as well, British On-Farm Innovative Network, and you know, they've actually managed to figure out a way of finding those grants and turning the farmers into maybe just hosts, but usually hosts and people who can sample as well, and get a payment for that. And then from our business point of view, that's allowed me to hire the right, you know, when I'm doing a recruit on the farm, I can actually say, well, yeah, maybe we'll put in that job description a bit of sampling, a bit of research, and now we're a farm that are comfortable to, you know, to be in a position to go look for those research projects. That makes it exciting for my team. It means that we are really getting involved in that, but we're also, as we get involved and as we do it again and again, we're not answering the same sort of slightly dumb questions that I probably asked with you guys to begin with. We start, you know, really get into it and know that. So as a Q&A thing, wouldn't it be interesting if farms could actually be potentially put their head above the parapet, set their businesses up, and maybe, you know, even, you know, could that be a bolt-on payment in RPA or something? That would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Anyway, there you are. All done. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Katherine, for giving us an overview of H3. Thank you very much. And also Fraser and Ruth for fixing our food. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to wrap the session up by giving you an overview. Questions at the end. Tom, we'll come to you as soon as we get to the end. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the AgZero Plus project, which is about developing nature-positive, carbon-neutral farming systems. So, thank you. So this project is funded by UK Research and Innovation, as are the other two projects you've heard about today. It's co-led by UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology and Rothamsted Research, with strong support from British Geological Survey, National Centre for Earth Observation and Plymouth Marine Laboratory. So a real team effort, uniting BBSRC and NERC expertise. So the approach we're taking is measuring integrated measures at the farm system level, and you would have heard many of the talks this morning that have taken the same approach. We're looking at a range of scales as well. So we're going from the landscape, catchment, farm, and the plot scale. So we're trying to cover a whole range of scales. Like the other projects, we're very much taking a participatory approach, working very closely with farmers to co-design solutions. And ultimately what we're about is quantifying the trade-offs between food production, emissions, pollution, soil and water health, and biodiversity by providing largely free tools, data, and models to the farming industry. So that's a sort of quick overview. At the core of our project is the Study Farm Network, where we're working with farmers to co-design low-carbon sustainable farming systems, and we've taken a sort of pyramidal approach here, where we're undertaking whole farm audits on hundreds of farms. And here what we're doing is using high resolution Earth observation data, models, and farmer-led monitoring using AI tools to essentially benchmark and characterize a whole range of farming systems, as many as we possibly can, along gradients of nutrient use, carbon capture, food production. So we're trying to sort of understand the footprint, if you like, with that whole farm audit. And I've got some leaflets here, if you want one at the end, that will describe how we're doing that in more detail. Then above that, we've identified around 40 what we would call sort of lead innovation farmers. And here what we're doing is we're going out onto the ground with our survey teams to fill gaps, to collect data on carbon, look at beneficials, so basically collecting empirical data to sort of really pick up on the kind of current farmer-led practices, very much like the other projects are. And I think we could join forces there. And then on a small number of farms, we're nesting sort of mechanistic experiments where we're doing very detailed, continuous measures of things like greenhouse gas emissions. And what we're doing there is trying to blend sort of scientific and farmer innovation. We're looking over the horizon a little bit, but we're talking to farmers about, which of the innovations like rock dust and biochar might be viable in the future in the next 5-year, 10-year horizon. So we're sort of pushing the envelope a little bit on those farms with experimental approaches like Ruth, is doing in Leeds. And then our colleagues in PML, Plymouth Marine Laboratory, are looking at the whole catchment and really what farming and regenerative farming does to the coastal zone and emissions, because it's really important to link all this together as well. It's a connected landscape. So I'm just going to quickly run through the whole farm environmental audit, the base of the pyramid, and this has got 4 key strands. What we're doing is providing farmers with a comprehensive natural capital baseline, and you'll see how we do this in a minute. So this is, the type of assets, environmental assets they have and their condition. Then what we're doing is we're tapping into things like gatekeeper and muddy boots to assess the impacts and risks of farming operations on these assets, this natural capital. And so we're looking at pesticide risk assessment, carbon modeling, carbon emission modeling, nutrient use efficiency, things like that, and looking at how biodiversity model, we can look at biodiversity population models and how they're influenced by those impacts. Then once you've got the baseline and you've looked at the impacts and risks, you can start to move into the environmental opportunity space. And we have our ePlanner tool, and this is going to be demonstrated live at 3 p.m. today on stand B31. So if you want to hear more about it, come along and you'll hear more about the ePlanner, which is providing farmers with environmental opportunity maps at 5 meter scale for suitability for woodland planting, water resource protection, pollinator and bird habitat creation, and natural flood management. And then finally, once you've looked at the opportunities, then we're providing a whole range of tools for farmers, mobile phone apps, to help farmers monitor the outcomes of their operations. This is by far the most cost-effective way to collect data rather than sending scientists out, and it's a great tool for engagement as well. And once you've done all that, we're developing metrics, reporting measurements, decision support tools, the what if I did this, to test the scenario. So that's the sort of thing we're doing in the farm audit, but if you want to know more, come along this afternoon. I'll just show you this very quick schematic of how we drill down through our data. So the farm health check works by the farmer submitting their SBI number, we fetch their mapping data, and then we can drill down through a very large number of spatial data sets, high resolution habitat data from commercial satellite providers, our hedgerow map, which was released in January, so the extent of height of all the hedges, crop maps, so we can look at the crop rotation over 10 years, including the frequency of cover crops in every field, grassland management, which is seeking to pick out things like the timing and frequency of cutting and whether it's set stocked or mob grazing, crop yield, soil carbon, our biodiversity, our ecological explorer tool, which gives an idea of the kind of hotspots and cold spots for biodiversity in the farming landscape for each farm, and then the historic agri-environment schemes. And we've produced a whole load of metrics in the reporting system. For this, I won't go into detail. We can auto-generate a report and maps for each of these and provide it to the farmer, and we can benchmark against other farms, similar farms in the county, in the region, nationally, whatever. It's really important to benchmark, though, I think. So that
I want one of those. They look great.
Come along.
Thank you very much.
Okay, then just moving very quickly further up the pyramid, the innovation farms. We're taking a paired whole farm approach where we're looking at an innovative farmer and a neighbouring conventional farmer, though I agree with Tom, there's no such thing as a conventional farmer. It's a gradient, really, what you're looking at. So we accept that it's a gradient. And this is where I think there's a lot of synergy between H3 and Fix Our Food, where we're actually, looking at these measures, empirical measures. We're looking at innovation by crop, by soil type, and doing essentially a mini whole farm audit, collecting data. And these are the sorts of innovations that we're looking at, which have many similarities: agroforestry, biochropping, companion cropping, zero-till, you name it. We're trying to look at it as well, putting measures on it. So that's the innovative farms. Then at the top of our pyramid, we're very fortunate to have a range of mechanistic experiments exploring new and existing innovations. Rothamsted have a fantastic replicated arable crop rotation experiment where they're looking at zero-till versus deep-till, organic matter additions, and the complexity of crop rotation. So strong synergies to Ruth's projects in Leeds, and I think you need to talk to Rothamsted about how we can link up there. Rothamsted also have a very similar sustainable grazing system experiment where they're looking at mob grazing versus conventional set stocking and herbal lays versus straight grass, doing this in an experimental way, understanding the mechanisms. And finally, CEH has been looking at greenhouse gas mitigation experiments at the plot scale. So we've gone right down to the plot to look at the trade-offs between food production, crop yield, and innovations like biochar, rock dust, compost, living mulch, bioactive digestates, inhibited fertilizers, little and often. We've tried all the combinations, and we've got robotic greenhouse gas samplers 24/7, measuring the emissions of CO2, N2O, and methane as well. So we can provide some numbers, but we need to scale these things up. We need to test them in the farming systems. So special thanks to the AgZero Plus team, particularly John Storkey at Rothamsted, and John Redhead, who's on our stand, Grace Skinner, and Jenna Lawton, who are the key members of the team behind the Farm Health Check. So thank you. Right, over to questions. So who's got some questions that they want to ask the panel? I've got Tom, I think you were first. He put his hand up earlier. He was very cheeky. Yeah. Have we got a microphone, please? Oh, here it comes, yeah. Sorry, we just wait for the microphone so everyone can hear the question, Tom.
Thank you very much, Richard. Tom Allen Stevens, the British On-Farm Innovation Network. We support farmers who do on-farm trials, and that's my main question. So, the thing about farming is that there is no first mover advantage in farming. The farmers who make that step into new innovations, they're not the ones who get the reward. In fact, it's the people who learn from that and come along next who usually get the reward. They go through all the pain, often the costs, for no reward. So my question to the farmers is how does society recognize, or how should society recognize that pain that you go through, the cost, and how should you be rewarded for it? And then secondly, for the scientists on the panel, farmers have a stigma that farmers can't do on-farm trials, that they can't record them scientifically. It's something I would dispute, and the farmers who work with me would dispute as well. But I would just wonder, how much you agree with that. What you feel about it. What are ways round it in order to get good scientific data from on-farm trials?
Okay, Tom.
Okay, Tom, I can start off. I think obviously I've got experience of working with Boffin, which is great, and as I said just earlier, it allows us to You can dabble in it. You could just do it as a little bit of extra, and you've recognised our time, and you've recognised that we are capable of doing sampling and things. An interesting point that I think you've mentioned before is that a lot of the boffin trials just logistically are completely impossible to do if you want to be a university researcher with their sampling team, because all the samples have to happen at the same time, geographically across a large area, and everyone needs to be transported everywhere. So the costs are just through the roof, and it just ain't going to happen. Whereas a farmer is on site, there's no transport costs, and they're only doing their own farm, and therefore they can all get it done on the same day. So logistically, the boffin, that sort of pattern that boffin uses, it opens up research projects that couldn't happen elsewhere. So that's an absolutely awesome part of it, and farmers are being paid. I think the example of the H3 project, I did say before, it was very clear at the beginning that farmers weren't going to be paid, but the farmers could have turned around and said, I ain't going to do it, we want to be paid. But there was an agreement that what we were getting out of it was good, right? We were interested in data, and the H3 designed the project as a very low maintenance project for farmers, right? So the actual farmers pretty well don't have to do anything onerous whatsoever. They just have to deliver data, which should be easy. In fact, I'm the worst at delivering data on the whole lot. I know that. I knew you were going to. I could feel you looking at me. But everyone else is very good. I'm not very good at doing it. But and so I think if you just I think there has to be that open conversation, and researchers have to look at that plan, which they've either developed with the farmers or not, and they're going to say, well, come on. Let's be serious about the time and the effort involved, and make sure we've got budget lines to make that work if they are asking a lot from farmers.
Thank you. Yeah. Fraser.
From my end, obviously the simple response is cash support, all that side of things, which is what we're getting to a degree through Innovative Farmers and through the FIPL funding that we've pulled together. I think I'll sort of turn it around in terms of what do we get out of it. And I think over the last year, what we've got out of it as farmers working together and working with the rest of the team is we're all in the shit together at times in terms of when things don't work. And it's been a really challenging year for us all. So there's that social side. And I think we sometimes don't look at that. We look at the financials, but we don't look at the socials. But also I think that sense of probably why we're all at Groundswell actually is in terms of we want to learn. We really value knowledge. I mentioned that word, that curious minds. We're trying to make farming more exciting in terms of what we do, and just the simple things like the WhatsApp group and just getting that to work. And that was something, I can see our next question is sat behind, in terms of that was a really great thing that came out of Innovative Farmers, just set a WhatsApp group, and we're just getting knowledge. And as upland farmers, we don't have access to agronomists. We've now, through this project, they've all got access to an agronomist in effect, and they're learning new skills. So I think, exactly like I say, easy answer is cash support, and that is important, but I think we get a lot more out of it as well.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to come in,
I just
Katherine?
wanted to answer on the scientist side of things, and I have 2 points. The first is that in the H3 project, there was no budget for a farmer involved, but we had a small budget, and some people could say it was tokenistic and not enough, for the change farmers. So there was some money set aside because we recognised that there was going to be a cost involved in changing practices. So there was some money for each cluster to change, not very much. And then on the farmers doing measurements, I think that is a stigma that's often around, and I've been told that by multiple facets. I don't agree, and I don't think that universities are shy of training new people. We have interns, we have students that don't know how to do it, and we're happy enough with them collecting data. So I think it just takes a little bit of training and thinking of that.
Yeah, I'd just like to come in as well. I think with our middle tier farms, where we're not asking people to change their practice, we're just putting numbers on it. I think that the farm report that we produce as well is, well received, and I think that's fine, because we're not asking for change particularly. There is a bit of a nuisance factor in providing data, but it's sort of compensated. Where you're getting into experiments, where you're looking at rock dust and biochar, we absolutely rent the land, pay the farmer for their time. We also, I should have said, have set aside a budget for when we do structured interviews with farmers, that we pay for their time as well. If we're going to spend an hour with someone, we'll pay them £50 because, that's reasonable. And we're getting a huge amount out of it. So yeah, it's a mixed model depending on the degree to which you're causing disruption to a farming business, I think.
Can I also add on the researcher side? Personally, I haven't heard that farmers can't do research. I feel the opposite. Farmers are always doing experiments on their own farms, and that's where all the knowledge on farm comes from. So yeah, I don't agree with that at all. I guess for the project with Fraser's group of farmers, what the university's been able to help with is design of those trials, and also the thought of how you're going to analyse the data, how you're going to feed that information back to the farmers, understanding that data. So I hope that you have felt that that's what we can offer in that situation, but I definitely feel there's a role of the universities supporting farmers doing their own trials, and that's where it should happen.
And that's exactly true. We just wanted to stick some grass in a field, basically, and have a look at it. But then that's like, well, sorry guys, but nobody will talk to us if we do that. We need that scientific rigour to go alongside it. And not that just sticking some grass in a field and looking at it isn't really valuable as well, because actually, at a local level, that is what will drive change.
Yeah. I think the only issue that farmers will have is the cost associated with any analysis, really detailed analysis. And then, for example, like the trial I've developed on the university's farm, we've got real cutting edge machines that are measuring greenhouse gas emissions every hour. That's not necessarily needed on some of the farm trials that you needed, but for the data that we want to collect, that we need a massive installation on our farm for that, and infrastructure. So that there's both that's needed, and it's that, I suppose, the cost of those real detailed analysis. But that's from a university's perspective, it's not necessarily a farmer's perspective.
Okay, I suggest we move to another question. You've been waiting patiently. Sorry.
Very patiently. No, thank you, everyone. This has been great. What I wanted to ask you about is sort of like, what happens after you finish the research, and how do you approach the whole dissemination and embedding of all these things? Because everything you're doing is amazing, but if it's going to last 3 years, and then it's like someone else is going to be like, ooh, I have a great idea, just because they didn't know your project. So how does that happen? And is academia or grant world changing in terms of putting that into it? I know it's not. I'm sort of like being facetious here.
Okay. I've got people shaking their heads, so I better answer this.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
So from our perspective, we have, because our funding is what's called core funding, strategic funding, both Rothamsted and UKCEH, we have a commitment to maintain those data sets, and those tools and those models are generally maintained through our core strategic funding in the long term. That's the reason we get the funding, is for long-term research. So that I think is really positive. With things like the Rothamsted experiments, I also know they're funded by the Laws Foundation, which is a charitable foundation which enables, again, long-term funding. It's difficult, I'll be honest with you, it's very difficult to get long-term funding. You can get a 5-year grant and do some interesting science, but it's very difficult to get a follow-on. So that's the different. So H3 and Fix Our Food are kind of on these 5-year grant cycles. Our funding is on a long-term strategic basis. So you need both, but we do have that facility to keep these things going in the longer term. Tom.
And just to reiterate what I said earlier, I mean, we just sort of push for this idea that let's try and include and pay for things that once this project finishes, we can carry on with. So that was what the Vida Cycle Soil Mentor idea was. In fact, that was the money that you guys had budgeted for the change farmers, and we all sort of agreed amongst ourselves we don't feel like we're putting our farms at that much risk with the change, because we like to change, right? So actually, let's put this money into something else that's useful. So hopefully that sort of jump starts our knowledge base around that, and then once the funding finishes, we can carry on paying for that subscription ourselves, which is not going to break the bank, but we're used to it and we've got that data. So it's things like that. And the other really interesting part of it is, we've got 34 members. It's a growing farm cluster, 34 this year, probably 36 next year. of which we've got 7 regen farmers within that group. And there was definitely a recognition that, making these changes is a lot easier if you can see it over the hedge in a next door neighbour. And the fact is that we've got 34 farmers benefiting from this H3 research, and the legacy of that, to a certain extent, will be the fact that we can lean on that information and that data we have that's so relevant to our little geography as well, which is very helpful.
Yeah, we actually spend a lot of time looking for extra funding to carry on the project, so that hinders our research as well, because a lot of my time is then taken up for the next funding call, and just on top of that is my job as well, because my job will end with the funding. So it's not just a pressure to carry on the trial, but also for a job. So it's a poor way of structuring funding for farming trials.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another question? This gentleman at the back there.
Thanks very much. I'm pretty new to this, so if any of my assumptions are naive, you can disabuse me. It seems to me that we've actually already demonstrated, we already know that these kinds of farming practices are more productive and more profitable if they're implemented well. So kind of lifting the conversation out of science and keeping it very firmly on sort of food production, I'm interested in kind of how science is focused on helping farmers. So Tom, for instance, talked about the H2 project, which sounds like it's really helping farmers to actually make the transition. And so I immediately go, yeah, well, that's, that has a very material impact. And then Richard, you talked about some data models, and maybe you could mention some more about that. I'm interested in, because it seems to me that the big issue is the barriers to change rather than the change itself. That's kind of self-evident. And so science can really help with that. How much of science is focused on creating blueprints, creating information that is readily accessible to farmers to use when they know that they actually want to make this change?
Yeah, just briefly answer that is that when on the survey that I mentioned in my talk, one of the questions on that was how can the university support Regen Ag? And it was an open question. I've been through all of the responses. Every respondent answered that question. And on top came evidence-based practice and research evidence. So I was following that, that information given from the farmers. And I guess, so the main thing from our trial is the walks that we do. So anyone, like I said, can come down and have a look at the trial, but we get a regular group of farmers that have been helping from the get-go, who are invested in looking at what's happening on the farm because they have helped us design it. And the conversation, from my point of view, the conversations between the farmers and those that go on during those walks is incredible, and a lot of learning and knowledge sharing happens during that time. I think actually it's much better than me sitting and showing a load of graphs a lot of the time, because the conversations actually stop when you take everyone back into an office and talk about data. So it's much better, I find, having those conversations on a farm walk.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's a lot about trying, in terms of blueprints, it's quite difficult, I think, with something like Regen Ag, because everyone's farm is different. And so in the H3, I think developing a regen scoring system and trying to map the connection. So from a university and research perspective, mapping how different combinations function in different landscapes. And if you can connect the combinations with the outcomes, then that can help farmers to decide what outcomes or what combinations might work for them.
Yep. So a couple of things. One was the idea that, we've got to remember that from an H3 and the Fix Our Food point of view, it's funded by Transforming UK Food Systems. So obviously, as a certain remit, my understanding is a certain remit is that, there is data required for policy guys to make big changes, right? And although that's one step removed from a farmer, it's still very relevant, right? If we're keen on becoming regenerative farmers, we want to make sure the policy guys are comfortable to support us doing that. So there's that sort of things. But then coming back to the farmer, I mentioned a few things like these biannual meetings we have are really getting to the nitty gritty within the context of our geographical area and our soil types of how to go through and do the practicalities behind it. And all of that is recorded by the social scientists. They turn up to all these meetings or sit in a corner trying to pretend to not be there, but they're noting everything down quite carefully and recording that, and we have those transcriptions to help us as a group in the future if we wanted to. And then the social scientists also, as I said before, they're trying to build a picture of those barriers and trying to take that blueprint of barriers and change required and pressures on farmers to the policymakers as well. So I think that's another sort of key aspect of the research.
I think it's a great question in terms of, I think the thing I come across is I work with a lot of farmers that getting them to Groundswell would probably involve bundling them in the back of a van and kidnapping them for 2 days, because they ain't going to come to stuff like this, and they're probably much more skeptical about a lot of this than what we are. So I think the really important thing is putting stuff on the ground. And like I say, it's not the science or not the graphs, and that isn't going to influence that change. It's going to be looking at it and being really genuine about it, because we're seeing stuff already that we didn't accept in terms of, oh yeah, everybody knows cocksfoot's great, but it don't like wet. That's what we've discovered pretty quickly. It grows really well under trees, guys, because it's drier under there like this winter. But really, how do we take this research and put it on the ground? That's the key thing.
Yeah, so no, I absolutely agree. I think 10 years ago, it was just expected that the research would have an impact. Now every project has embedded within it an impact requirement. We have social scientists in all of our projects, which is incredibly important for the impact agenda, to understand the barriers and the incentives, fully understand the human side of all of this. And I think the demonstration farms is critical, very valuable. I think talking to DEFRA, we all talk to DEFRA to try and change policy, to influence policy as much as we can. I think that's also very, very important. So yeah. Anyway, we're out of time. So I'd just like to thank the panel for being excellent once more. And we'll hang about you can find us, I'm sure.
I'll be on the beef shorthorn stand.
Yeah. We're on stand B31 if you want to find me. Thank you very much.